Greetings, sweet family. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you here for the third episode of the FreeMan Show. There's a lot of things that we're going to discuss today, but as always, the main topic of discussion is freedom. Now, freedom stems primarily from responsibility, total, complete responsibility for everything that you think, feel, and do. The word responsibility, if you break it down, means to respond to one's ability. And the truth is that we all have limitless ability. The only limitation to our ability is our thought patterns, the belief structures that we maintain, the agreements that we keep. Believe you can or believe you can't. Either way, you're right. As we discussed in the last episode, most people experience many thoughts and emotions that they did not consciously and intentionally select. Many of the thoughts and emotions that people experience are a result of the programming that has been impressed upon their subconscious mind over the course of their life. And this is largely outside of our control, in that when we are a child, we are more or less at the whim of our benefactors, our parents, our teachers, those that we look up to who are to some degree responsible for us, because we have not at that time developed the wherewithal to take up the responsibility for our being. As a result, much of the thought patterns and emotional tendencies that we have cultivated by the time that we reach adolescence have been impressed upon us from external forces, and were not thought patterns and emotional tendencies that we consciously and intentionally selected, which to a large degree explains why there is so much discomfort for many, why childhood and adolescence is so deeply traumatic, because we intuitively sense our true divine nature. And because humanity in large part has held itself in a state of hypnotic delusion, our own divinity is considered blasphemy in the socio-cultural and socio-political spheres. And to some degree, this is by design. Inherent to the matrix is copious quantities, multitudes of dogma that are deliberately designed to separate one or obstruct one's awareness of their own divinity. And a child, most children, up until society and culture have squashed it out of them, are intuitively aware of their own divinity. However, being brought up in the matrix, as most people in organized society have been, that awareness of our own divinity, our intuitive faculties, our connection to source, is effectively obstructed. And this is because the child, in fear of their well-being, their bodily, mental, emotional and spiritual integrity seeks to protect themselves, and so they begin to wear masks that they design to protect themselves from these external forces that seek to squash their divinity. However, we're here now. We're adults, most of us, to some degree, physically and chronologically at the very least, or adolescents. I don't really know exactly who is watching my channel, but I presume that in large part it's adults or older adolescents. And at a certain cusp, we have to take up the responsibility for our being, in that we must recognize that our life belongs to us, that our body and our mind are our property, and our property is ours to do with as we will, so long as what we do does not cause harm. Now, this means that the idea of pandering to, catering to, seeking to please others to some degree must be set on the back burner, because we recognize that our self-actualization, realizing our true nature, involves doing and being who we are authentically, and not performing for everyone else. And this is entering into the realm of total responsibility, because blame cannot be present as you align with your true self. As you begin to move into a state of authenticity, of alignment with your true nature, you then are accountable for your thoughts and your emotions and your behavior. You no longer have any ground to stand on in asserting that you did something because somebody else told you to, or because you were afraid of what might happen if you didn't. Being true to oneself involves taking responsibility for everything that we think and feel and do. And this leads us into what I consider to be the key to freedom, amongst many other keys, but one of the principal keys to your freedom is self-control, dominion over your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, and all of your behavior, dominion over your own body. Self-control, to some degree, is the mechanism by which you extricate yourself from all systems of bondage. Now, much of the tendencies that we have, which one could call are depraved, one could say are destructive, weak, harmful even. These tendencies stem not just from a lack of self-control, but from belief in things that are not true. Any kind of destructive, and I'm not talking about creative destruction in the sense of, destroying old dilapidated structures that are corrupted or rotted and in need of removal. I'm talking about destruction in the sense of harm, causing harm to oneself or others. These tendencies stem from a perception of reality that is not in alignment with the truth. Because when one recognizes the truth that we are all one, that the world in its totality is you in your totality, there is no inclination to cause harm of any kind. In fact, as we have stated numerous times over the course of the show thus far, harm is verboten. Harm is a violation of cosmic law. The two pillars of enlightenment are to do no harm and to take no shit. To desire to or feel inclined to cause harm of any kind is to entertain the illusion of separateness, that there is an other. So if we want to be free, we have to be totally responsible. We have to be accountable for everything that we do. We must relinquish the desire to blame others for any of our thought patterns or emotions or behaviors. We are ultimately responsible. We are ultimately culpable for everything that we think and feel and do. There is no blame. You cannot blame. I mean, you can, but you are deluding yourself when you blame others for your thoughts, your emotions, and your behavior. We must enter into a state of self-control in which we are the master of our minds, of our thoughts and our emotions, the master of our bodies. Now, there are many bodily phenomena, physical activities which take place in the body that are autonomic in the sense that we do not consciously and intentionally grow our hair or produce insulin or digest our food. However, bodily activities, actions that we take, which we do consciously and intentionally perform, even if reactively, are things that we are responsible for, things that we must enter into a state of mastery of. We must control our own bodies, just as we must control our own thoughts and emotions. This is the only way to become free. If you blame your thoughts and your emotions and your actions on external forces or other people, other entities, you're not free. What this means is that we must transition from being weak to being strong. Many of us have been weak for a long time. It's not entirely our fault in the sense that being brought up in the matrix, we have been deliberately disempowered. We have been trained to be weak. We have been trained to be parasitic, which is where the blaming and the lack of accountability and the desire for support systems stems from. A lack of strength. weakness, an identification with weakness. Now, this is essential information here when we're talking about becoming free, because weakness stems from beliefs. Weakness stems from agreements that we have maintained. Weakness is not the truth of who we are. In truth, we are supremely powerful, creative beings, co-creators of this reality. We are not weak. It is only our identification with the false personality structures that we have designed that delude us into the notion that we are weak. So, as I mentioned in the previous episode, the new tagline of the show is reprogram your own mind. These index cards, as I described thoroughly in the previous episode of the show, constitute a program that I have consciously and intentionally designed for my subconscious mind that is in alignment with my true divine self. Reminding yourself of your divinity and the aspects of that divinity, your true attributes, reminding yourself of these things and marinating your subconscious mind in those things regularly will, over time, tune you into those states of consciousness, along with some other things, which we're going to go into very soon here. There are things that you can do that will tune you in to divine states of consciousness, and they're rather simple things. I made up a little list of many of the different things that I do that elevate me into those divine states and those high vibrational frequencies. Going back to the Hermetic principles, the first Hermetic principle, the principle of mentalism, the all is mind, the universe is mental. Thoughts and emotions precipitate behaviors. So if there are behavioral tendencies that you have that you don't like, that manifest aspects of your reality that you don't vibe with, then what you have to do is to dig deep inside and find what are the thought patterns and emotions that precipitate these disharmonious behaviors. Where are these things coming from? And what you can do is with these index cards, like the deck that I have there, you can write something along the lines of, when these thought patterns and emotions arise within me, I prune them out of my mind and replace them with thought patterns and emotions that are in alignment with the truth of who I am. Something along those lines. And in relation to that, one of the things that I have found very, very valuable, and I would even consider to some degree essential in your self-actualization, is to articulate your principles. What is the ground that you stand on? What do you genuinely feel? What are the agreements that you authentically resonate with in your heart of hearts? What moral principles do you really adhere to? We cannot deviate from our principles to pander to the preferences of other people or to external forces, such as governments or other authority figures. What's right is right. And no matter what other people in our life tell us, or entities in our life tell us, we know intuitively what is morally correct. And we must adhere to that. Not only what is morally correct, but what is right for us in our journey of self-actualization, realization of our divine nature. Steve Jobs said, "Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary." This leads me to something that I've mentioned on the show, but which it behooves us to dig a little bit further into now, which is that in the Matrix, one of the things that we have been trained to do is to hold the intellect in supreme regard. And many spiritual teachers will tell you that this is not only foolish, but dangerous. Because the intellect is just one small, one section of our mental faculties. The intellect is great for logic and reason and arithmetic, linear thought processes. But that's it. Sadhguru said that, says frequently in his teachings, that the intellect is like a knife that cuts. And that is useful for a few things, but only for a few things. I personally, in my indoctrination, was trained to rely heavily on my intellect for navigating my experience. And while it served me well to some degree, it also became a prison of my own making. My intellect became the master rather than my servant. And to some degree, that left brain, the intellect, held my consciousness in bondage, limiting my perception of reality to intellectual lenses, which in large part obstructed my view of reality, the magical nature of creation. So for many of us, particularly men, because we have a tendency to lean more heavily into the intellect, being that the left brain is the masculine aspect of the mind. But all of us have been trained to rely almost exclusively on the intellect for navigating our experience. And that being the case, it behooves us to lean almost completely away from the intellect and into the intuition. Intuition is the feminine aspect of the mind, and in many ways is more directly connected with source, more directly connected with infinite intelligence. That being the case, I have found less and less, and these days, in fact, no value whatsoever in believing things. It's been said amongst those in spiritual circles, which involve astrology, that now that the age of Pisces, which has come to an end, was an age of belief, which explains many of the illusions and delusions of that era. We have now fully entered into the age of Aquarius, which is an age of knowing. Believing things is, to some degree, an intellectual process. When you're presented with information, it is foolish to believe that information intellectually, to receive information intellectually and take it at face value. It's foolish. It's a good way to be tricked. And manipulated. Instead, when you receive information, weigh it in your heart. Feel whether the information presented resonates with truth in your hridayam. Whether it feels authentic and accurate in your intuitive heart knowing. This is a much more valuable crucible to put information through, because the laws of nature are written inside of your heart. Your heart, as the center of your being, is directly connected to source. And I hypothesize that your heart is at the center of your being. Being that it is at the center of your being, that is your point of origin, that it is from your heart center that the rest of you manifests. The intellect only knows what has been evidenced through five sense perception, whereas your intuition, your higher spiritual perceptual faculties, know high spiritual truths that transcend your five sense perceptual experiences. So it's a lot more reliable when it comes to discernment. Over time, as you lean further away from the intellect and into the intuition, you will develop a degree of trust in infinite intelligence. You will begin to trust the truth that the universe is infinitely intelligent, that God, or infinite intelligence, or the Great Spirit, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, Christ, Krishna, Shiva, Yahweh, whatever you want to call it, the universe is infinitely intelligent, and it knows what it's doing. It knows who you are. It knows what you want, and it wants nothing more than to give that to you. But it can't if you are vibrating at a frequency where you don't feel like you deserve it, or where you are afraid that circumstances will not allow for the manifestation of what you desire. You gotta get rid of that. It takes some time, but as you trust your intuition you will begin to develop trust in the holistic intelligence of the cosmos. And you will stop resisting creation from doing exactly what it means to do, and you will allow it to. You will allow yourself to tune into the frequency of the divine, which means that you will start experiencing your own divine self and your own divine life unfolding before your very eyes all the time, moment to moment. What you will find is that this means no more doubt and no more fear, and instead a basically perpetual state of gratitude. And gratitude will become your home. Trust and gratitude together will become the nature of your experience. And you'll find that that itself, no fear, no doubt, no ruminating on the past, no worrying about the future, just knowing what you want and knowing that it's going to come, knowing that your desires are righteous and that you are allowed to and deserve these righteous desires in your heart because your morals are in alignment with the laws of nature and truth. You just won't worry anymore. You'll just find yourself not sweating it. External circumstances will arise that might, if you had less conviction, induce or inspire in you fear or doubt or worry, but you just won't be fazed. You just have so much trust that you won't entertain any of that stuff. It takes time. This reprogramming process, it takes time.